This video is sponsored by Stream. Stream helps you to build scalable chat and activity feeds for your application. Stream also takes care of security, hosting, and scaling so you can focus more on the functionality and building high-quality applications. Check out their SDKs for many different platforms. They have iOS with Swift and iOS with SwiftUI, Flutter, Android, React, React Native, and so much more. To learn more about Stream, check the link in the description for more information. All right, everyone. So welcome to the part 2 of creating the multi-platform reminders application. Let's go ahead and resume where we stopped last time. So you can see that in our application for iOS as well as macOS, we implemented the add new list view, but it didn't really save anything. So it's not saving it to core data. So what can we do to make sure that we are saving it to core data? Since we are inside a view and we are using the MVVM design pattern, we're going to follow it and we are going to create a new group for our view models. Let's go ahead and add a new view model. Now you can call your view model anything that you want. I'm just going to go ahead and add a new view model and I will call it home view model, and it will be available for both the targets because we want to reuse it. Okay, so now let's go ahead and implement our home view model. First of all, I'm going to import core data. Next, I'm going to create a class called home view model. This will be an observable object. Now, inside home view model, what we want to do is we want to fetch all the different lists that you have created and saved in core data, but we also want to make sure that whenever a new item is added, meaning a new list is added, we get that particular list and we can display and refresh on the screen. Now you might be very tempted to go on the home screen and use the fetch request. I usually don't like to do these things. The reason is that now we are putting some core data code inside our home screen. So I don't really want to perform a fetch request right from over here and pollute my views. I want to perform a fetch request from my view model. So my views are nice and clean without any code for fetching. For this, we're going to go ahead and get started by creating a fetch results controller. This is going to be a NS fetch results controller, and it is going to give us my list. Another thing that we are going to do is we are going to make sure that somebody is giving us a core data context, meaning the NS manage object context. All right. Now we can go ahead and implement init. And inside this, we will somehow initialize it. We don't really have any way to initialize it right now, but we will. And then we will also initialize fetch results controller. But the question is, if we are working with core data, who will be responsible for creating the core data NS manage object context? So for this, what we are going to do is we're going to create a core data manager. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new folder called managers and add a brand new file, core data manager. The responsibility of core data manager is to simply make sure that your core data stack is initialized correctly. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and import core data. I'm going to create a class called core data manager. In the manager, we're going to create a persistent container that is going to give us the manage object context and one particular instance, meaning a singleton, for the core data manager. So everyone is using the same instance of the core data manager. Now I'm going to create a private instance. And the reason I'm creating a private initializer or constructor is I don't want others to create multiple instances of Core Data Manager. So it will be a same instance, shared or singleton. I'm going to initialize the NS persistent container by passing in the name of the model, which in our case is reminders model. Reminders model is right here somewhere. You can see right there. That's the actual model file. That's what we're providing. And now we should be able to simply load the persistent stores. We're going to get a couple of different things. We're going to get a description and we're going to get error. Hopefully not the error, right? We're going to go ahead and unwrap it. If unwrapping is successful, then, well, there's not much you can do at this point. I mean, you can just go ahead and throw some sort of a, error saying that this is done. I mean, unable to initialize core data, and then we can even display or inject the message also. So this is our Core Data Manager. Let's go back now. Since now we have the Core Data Manager, we should be able to start using it in our home view model. You can see that in our home view model, we need to get access to the context. So this time we can ask Core Data Manager dot shared dot persistent container. Well, right now we don't have any way to get the actual context. Okay, so let's go back to the Core Data Manager and see what we're doing wrong. So if we go back to the Core Data Manager, maybe we can create a property context, which is going to return us the NS manage object context. And we can use persistent container.view context. It will make our lives a little bit more easy to simply write context and get the context. The next thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we are initializing fetch results controller. So NS fetch results controller, we need to pass in the fetch request, which we don't have. We need to pass in the manage object context. Well, we do have that. We can simply say context. Section name, we can pass in nil. Cache name, we can pass in nil, and that's it. All right. Now, we can also make sure that we are performing the request. So whenever you will create an instance of home view model, you want to go ahead and perform the fetch on the fetch results controller so that we can get all the different lists from the database. My guard, my list equals to fetch results controller dot fetch objects, not fetch request, but fetch objects. These will be the actual objects that we have fetched. If you're not able to do that, then just return, don't do anything. All right. Now, if I try to build this application, there is a lot of stuff that is missing. We don't have the fetch request. So let's go ahead and create a fetch request. In the extensions, I'm going to create an extension for my list, and I will call it my list plus extensions. My list plus extension will be an extension on the my list. And where is my list coming from? Well, that is the core data model that was automatically created for you. Let's go ahead and also import core data. Now, one of the properties we can add over here is all. This means that give us all of my list, meaning all the list. And this will be a my fetch request. It will return you my list. My list is a data model for the core data. Now we can create a request, which is my list.fetch request, request.sort descriptors. And we don't really want to have any sort descriptors, so I'm just going to pass in empty array and then return the request. So now we can create and return a NS fetch request. Let's go back over here and say my list.all, which is basically saying give me or perform a request for all. All right. Now, there are a couple of things that are still missing in our home view model. Well, one of the things is when you do fetch, you get the core data models, which will be my list, which is right here that we have created in our model, my list. That is what you're going to get back. But that is not something that we want to give it to the screen, to the view, because that's a core data model, and it might have some properties that has nothing to do with being displayed on the view. It also may have some relationships and some hierarchy that we kind of wanted to flatten it out. So instead of doing that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a different view model that will allow us to do that. So let's go ahead and add a brand new view model right in our view model folder. And I will add a new view model, and we can call this my list view model. My list view model, which is going to represent single list. All right. Let's go ahead and create it. We will import core data, and now we can create a struct for my list view model. We can make sure it is identifiable so you can loop over it. I'm also going to make sure that you can pass in the my list, which is the core data model. So in order to create my list view model, you must pass in the actual core data model. Self.mylist equals to mylist. Perfect. Now we can go ahead and add some properties. Whatever the properties you're going to add over here, we want to make sure that those properties are available to be used on the UI. One property that we need is ID, which will be of NSManage object ID. And my list already has that. So we can simply go ahead and say object ID. Now, the other properties that we want to display are the name and the color codes. So let's go ahead and add name and color codes. Great. After we have created my list view model, let's go back to our home view model. And inside the home view model, we will create the my list view model as an array. Now we can go ahead and go through my list, which are the actual core data models. We're going to map through it. And for every my list item, we are going to create a view model. And we're going to put it or assign to my list. If there is any error, then we can go ahead and display the error. All right. So that will be our initial take. Maybe we will have to do something different also, but at least that is going to be our initial view model. Now it is time for us to go and see where and how we can use this view model. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into home screen for our iOS application. And what I want is that the home view model should be injected when you're creating home screen. All right, so how can we do that? Well, we can create a state object, private var VM, which is home view model. This means that you need to initialize it in the constructor or the initializer. Somebody needs to pass in the home view model. And you can see that the initialization syntax is a little bit different because we are initializing a state object. Now it's complaining because it's saying that, well, if you are trying to create home screen somewhere, you need to pass in the home view model. You can see it's over here. It's also complaining that you need to pass in the home view model. Let's see how we can do that. So in order to create a home view model, we need to do something like this. And now we should be able to pass the home view model. Let's go to the reminders iOS application. And over here, you can also see that it doesn't like it. It says that, hey, you need to pass something. So let's go ahead and pass a dependency on the home view model. Perfect. Let's go back. We got the home screen, home view model. We have everything over here. But right now, there are no items in the core data store or in our SQLite database. We need to make sure that we are saving something to the database. So the question is, how would we save something? Let's go to the home view model again. We're going to create a function called save new list. This is going to take the name of the list and the color code. We'll simply call it, color code is fine, I think. There we go. Inside over here, we can create a new instance of my list, passing in the context. Now the question is, where are we going to get the context? You can see that we need to pass in the manage object context. Well, that's what we already have, so we can simply pass it. Now we can go ahead and assign different properties like the name, which can be new list name, and the color code, which is simply color code. And finally, we can call mylist.save, which, by the way, does not exist. So it's not really going to work like that. We still will need to go and somehow implement the save function, because mylist does not really have the save function. Let's go back to the mylist over here. You can see that the mylist is there. You can also see that the mylist doesn't really have any save function. So what should we do at this point? There are many different ways that you can accomplish it. Let's start with a very basic approach, and then we will update that. I'm going to go ahead and add a save function, which can also throw. Now we can use the core data manager .shared.context.save, and now we can save it. This can actually blow up, so we're going to go ahead and call with a try. So if you call the save function, it's simply going to call this. Later on, we can go and update that and make it look much nicer, but right now we just want to see if it's going to save or not. We still have to make sure that we are calling the save new list function. So let's go back to our view. And over here, we can say vm.saveNewList, passing in the new list name and passing in the color code, so that it will save it to the core data. Let's go ahead and see if it works or not. I'm going to go ahead and run the application in iPhone. I'm going to go ahead and say add list. I'm going to go ahead and probably save something. So let's say groceries. And done. Hopefully it has saved. The problem is that we don't really know at this point, right? So now the question is, how can we know what the core data is actually doing? Can we debug core data so it can show us some sort of a commands that it is running, and we can have some sort of an idea that what the core data is doing behind the scene? The good news is that you can actually do that. Let's go ahead and see how we can accomplish that. So in order to debug core data and to see what the core data is actually doing, we have to add an argument passed on launch, or arguments, to our scheme. Let's go to Product, Scheme, Edit. And in the Run scheme, we will go to Arguments. And in the argument passed on launch, we can click this plus sign to add an argument. And the argument that we're trying to add is -com.apple. And there are multiple arguments you can pass in, but we're just trying to see the minimum amount of work we can do to get this to debug. So SQL debug 1, meaning on, turned on. And now let's close it. Let's go ahead and run it. And now you can see core data is doing some stuff. You can see all of this select going on, which is the basically the actual SQL getting executed. That's fine. Let's go ahead and add something. I'm going to go ahead and say to-do list and done. And looking at this over here, what SQL has actually done, this is the one that really interests me, the insert into ZMyList. So there's a table which is called ZMyList where we are adding all of these different things, including the color code and the name of the list. So this is an indication that there's a very good probability that our data is stored in the database. But how do we display it? So let's go back to our home screen. You can see right there, we are displaying my list view. And my list view currently is not really doing much, right? So what we want to do is pass to my list view all the my list. So we will go ahead and say my list vm.mylist, where my list property over here is my list view model. There we go. But the my list view doesn't really care that much about my list. So we need to go and update my list view so that it can support my list view model. So I'm just going to go ahead and add right there. There we go. The preview is now going to complain that, hey, you got to pass in something. I'm just going to go ahead and pass empty string, just to empty array, just to get by. And now we can go ahead and change this list so that it will display our list. So my list. We will get access to my list. And I just want to display it. For now, I just want to display it. Make sure that we are calling it correctly, my list. And I want to display my list dot name. That's it. Let's go ahead and build it first. And let's go ahead and run it. All right, so that's a really good indication that our data is actually stored successfully in the database, because you can see groceries and to-do both are getting displayed. So that's great. Let's do that also on the Mac side. Remember, we have another platform, which is Mac, and we haven't really done anything on the Mac side. So on the Mac side, let's go and jump over to home screen, and then we will go on the sidebar. The side over here, which is the macOS, it looks a little bit different. You can see that. So for the sidebar to work, we're going to make sure that somebody is passing in the actual VM, which is the home view model. So somebody is responsible for passing the home view model, just like we have done for the iOS app. We're going to add a constructor over here, or initializer. And in the my list, we can simply pass in my list, which is vm.mylist. So that is something that we can reuse. That's great. For the saving part right there, again, we can reuse our home view model, passing in the save new list name, and then the color code. I'll just write a comment over here that's saving a new list, so that you know that this line is actually saving a new list. In order to create a sidebar, somebody needs to pass in the view model. Let's go to the home screen, and right here, we can pass in the home view model. We can also make sure that our sidebar frame is minimum width at least is 200. This is kind of up to you. If you need 300, you can pass in 300. If you need 400, you can pass in 400. Again, for the preview for the sidebar, we will have to pass in the home view model. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and run it. So let's go ahead and add a new list. I'm going to go ahead and add a new list, and I will call it, let's say, groceries. Okay, interesting. It doesn't really appear over here. even though I have added a new list. Let's see what's going on in the terminal. It doesn't really say much on the terminal. That is fine. Let's go ahead and run the app again for macOS. Interesting. It actually did add it. You can see that the groceries is added. So it is being added, but it doesn't really display us the list until we restart our application. So that's not good. So let's go ahead and fix that. And I'm sure this is a problem with the iOS app also. So if I go ahead and run the iOS application, and if I go ahead and add a brand new list, you can call it, let's say, YouTube. You can see that it doesn't really appear. But if I stop and start the server again, then it does appear, YouTube, right there. So this means that YouTube is actually being persisted, but once we add a new entry, then it is not fetching the data after inserting it. So we need to fix that. And that part, in order to fix it, we need to go to the home view model. You can see that when the home view model is initialized, we get all the different objects. But when we save a new list, we don't. So we need to make sure that the home view model, whenever new items are actually being added, it should get the items again, the whole list again. There are many ways of doing that. One of the ways is to make sure that the fetch results controller delegate is set to self, where self is obviously our home view model. Now, let's go ahead and make sure that our home view model is conforming to NS fetch results controller delegate. That's the one that we want. So I'm just going to write an extension. And I usually like to write extensions for conforming to a delegate because it makes our code a little bit more cleaner. So here we go, delegate. If I build this, it still complains because in order to use the NS fetch results controller delegate, we have to make sure that we are also inheriting from NS object. So let's go ahead and also inherit from NS object. And if you're inheriting from NS object, then you will override the init. And now we will have to make sure that we are calling the super, which in this case is NS object, which is our parent class. Now inside the home view model, which is conforming to NS fetch results controller delegate, we can work towards a delegate function which actually does get fired whenever a new item is added. And that is the controller did change content. We're going to go ahead and get my list from the controller dot fetch objects as array of my list, else we will go ahead and return. Now we can go ahead and set my list equals to my list.map, and then we can say my list view model dot init. So you can kind of say that we are doing these two things at two different places. Keep in mind that this part is executed when you create an instance of the home view model. But this part is going to execute whenever you add a new list. Let's go ahead and build it. And let's go ahead and run it. You can see that I have 3 lists. So let's go ahead and add a new list and let's call it movies. And now you can see that as soon as the list is added, it is also displayed in the movies array, in the movies list. What about if we are using macOS application? So here is our macOS application. I'm going to go ahead and add something new. I'm going to say, Udemy. Maybe I want to work on Udemy videos. And there we go. So we added Udemy. Let's go ahead and run it again. And there we go. Now, one of the few things I want to point out that you don't have to do, that's the important part, is I have to add this line, couple of lines. The reason is that I'm using the same exact app name, which is reminders, which I created before. And that app is synced to the cloud, meaning CloudKit. So in order to just make sure that it is not syncing to the cloud, I had to write these lines. But you don't have to do that because you have not configured your previous application to sync to the cloud. And the reason is that I have the same exact name for the application, which is reminders. So that's the problem I was facing. You're not going to face that problem. Okay. So we're on to a good start. Let's go back to the iOS application. One of the things that would be really good to display, where is our home screen? Let's go to home screen, or let's go to the views, is it would really be nice if we can display this in a nicer way, right? I mean, right now we have a text, which is fine, not a big deal, but it would also be nice if we can display it much better. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new view in the shared folder, because this is going to be shared with multiple different, it will be shared with the macOS platform. My list cell view. So that's going to represent every single cell that we're going to display for a my list. We're going to get a view model, which is my list view model. So somebody is going to pass the my list view model, and you can already see that it is complaining that, hey, you're going to pass in the my list view model. And that becomes a little bit of a hassle, because if I want to pass in the view model, I need to create a my list view model, and which depends on the my list, which depends on something else. So you can do it if you want to. It's so simple that I don't even need that. All right. And now I can go ahead and simply display it, because all we're displaying is an icon for the image and some sort of a name. That's it. This is going to come probably later on, so we don't really have to worry about that. So we have VM dot and name. And over here we have also VM dot color code. All right. We have to make sure that we are using the my list view. So we will go back to our my list view and simply use my list view or cell view, passing in the list, which in this case can be my list. This will be our first approach. All right. I mean, maybe we will need to change it, but right now we're starting simple. Let's go ahead and try to see how it looks like. Okay, it looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and add another list over here. I'm going to go ahead and say reminders. And reminders right there. Okay, so this is working out to be pretty good. Now let's go to the macOS application. And we already have some lists. They look really nice with all this different icons being displayed. Now I can go ahead and add a new list, right? And that can be exercise. And there we go, blue exercise. Pretty good. So it looks like everything is working out very, very good. And we are done with creating our part of the app that displays the list or displays my list. It works on both the iOS applications as well as the Mac application, and it saves it into core data locally. So there will be a core data locally, core data saved on the iOS, and another one should be saved for macOS applications. All right. Now, this is all good, and I think this is where we're going to stop right now, because in the next part, we will be allowing the user to add items to each list. Right now, this is just a list, and it doesn't really have any items. But in the next video, we're going to talk about how we can create associations between a grocery list or my list and myListItem, meaning items inside the list like milk, sugar, bread, and so on. So that's pretty much it. We're going to end it right here. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I really hope that you're enjoying this series.